I never wanted to be a doctor. That confession might sound ungrateful to some, given the prestige and security the profession offers. But for me, medicine was a gilded cage, a life sculpted by my parents' expectations rather than my own desires. My name is Safia Chin, and for the past 6 years, I've lived a double life. To my parents, I'm Dr. Chin, the obedient daughter who followed the path they carved with surgical precision. But to the art world, I'm Aurora Knight, one of the most coveted contemporary artists in New York, my abstract pieces commanding millions without anyone suspecting the woman behind the name. The irony struck hardest this morning as I stood in the gleaming new wing of Metropolitan General Hospital, where both my parents have been legendary surgeons for 3 decades. They were celebrating the launch of a Healing Through Art initiative, and dominating the main lobby wall was my latest piece, a vivid, uncontained canvas that pulsed with emotion, purchased anonymously through my gallery for $2 million. My mother stood beside me, inspecting it with clinical detachment. "I don't understand modern art," she said, nose wrinkled. $2 million for splashes of paint? The board must be out of their minds. If only she knew those splashes would fund an entire year of pediatric care. My father, ever composed, added dryly, "At least it brings some color to the place, though new equipment would have been better." I held back a bitter laugh, recalling the night I painted it, fresh off a 36-hour shift in their hospital, running on fumes and resentment. I didn't sleep. I poured everything onto that canvas. The fatigue, the frustration, the suffocating weight of living a life that wasn't mine. But the real story began 10 years ago, when I was 18 and dared to dream of art school. I still remember standing in the living room, acceptance letter from the Art Institute clutched in trembling hands, while my father's voice thundered through the walls. "Absolutely not. No daughter of mine will waste her life painting pictures." The china cabinet rattled, as if even the house feared his disappointment. I wanted to scream that I'd already won 3 national art competitions under a pseudonym, that a gallery wanted to represent me, that art wasn't a hobby. It was who I was. But Dad, I got a full scholarship. They said I'm one of the most promising young artists they've seen. My voice barely carried across the polished floors. My mother sat on the leather sofa, her face frozen in a mask of cold disapproval. "Safia, we've invested everything into your future in medicine. Extra classes, summer internships, MCAT prep. This isn't a debate." I blinked back tears. "I never asked for any of that." "Enough," my father snapped. "You think art can give you a future? You want to end up like your cousin William?" He called himself a creative. He's 35 and still living in his parents' basement. "But I'm good at it," I whispered. "Really good." My mother rose, smoothing her blouse, though not a crease marred it. "You're good at science too, top of your class. Perfect MCAT. That's not an accident. That's your calling." I wanted to tell them everything, that I'd already sold paintings online, that someone believed in me. But in that moment, their dreams drowned out my own. And so I became Dr. Chin by day, painting under a pseudonym by night, building 2 lives that could never meet. Until this morning, when my worlds collided silently in the hospital lobby, and they stood inches from the truth without ever knowing it. They never knew about the fire that roared through me every time I picked up a brush, and deep down, I understood it wouldn't matter, even if I screamed it from the rooftops. In their world, success came starched and sterilized, wore a white coat, and spoke in medical jargon. So I stood in our living room with my future crushed in my fist, an acceptance letter to the Art Institute, trembling and torn by the weight of their expectations. I had a choice: defy my parents and risk losing everything, or find a way to survive without surrendering who I was. That night, I chose both. I declined the Art Institute's offer and enrolled at Preston Medical School, their alma mater, sealing my fate as their pride and puppet. But I also sent a quiet, defiant email to the gallery owner who believed in my art. My name is Aurora Knight. I'll need to work in complete secrecy. No photos, no press, no appearances. But I will paint. His reply came swiftly. Intriguing. Mystery is powerful. Send me your next piece. And with that, my double life began. By day, I dissected cadavers and memorized drug interactions, a model student in scrubs. By night, I poured my soul into canvases inside a tiny studio I rented under my alias. Every brushstroke a lifeline, a whisper of rebellion. The first year nearly broke me. Medical school was everything my parents said it would be. Demanding, relentless. But the more it drained me, the more vivid my art became. My paintings pulsed with rage, exhaustion, longing. Critics described them as visceral and surgically precise, and if only they knew how literal that was. My first major sale came during second year, a triptych bought for $180,000. I danced alone in my studio, champagne in hand, paint still on my fingers, while my parents called that same night to gush about my pathology exam. I let them talk, wondering what they'd say if they knew their precious doctor-to-be had just been hailed as the rising star of contemporary art. The years passed, and I walked two paths, respected medical student by day, anonymous sensation by night. The art world was electric with speculation over Aurora Knight, the elusive painter whose work stirred something primal in everyone who saw it. Prices climbed, collectors obsessed. There's something haunting in the way you see people, one critic wrote. It's almost surgical, anatomically perfect, yet emotionally devastating. I smiled to myself, thinking of the endless hours I spent in dissection labs, learning to see bodies from the inside out. By the time I graduated, I could have bought a private island with my earnings. But instead, I took a residency at Metropolitan General, my parents' hospital, and continued painting in secret. It was a tightrope walk, exhausting and isolating, but unexpectedly beautiful. Being a doctor made me a better artist, more precise, more empathetic, and being an artist made me a better doctor. My hands knew bones and tendons, but they also knew how to hold grief, how to recognize the poetry in pain. Still, every time my parents boasted about their brilliant daughter, every time they smiled like they'd been right all along, I thought about the canvases I'd sold for millions under a name they didn't know, until this morning, until they stood in their own hospital, proudly unveiling the new Healing Through Art wing, and casually dismissed the vibrant, massive painting in the lobby. My painting, the one they critiqued as splashes of paint, the one they didn't realize would fund the pediatric program they'd been fighting for years to expand. I stood beside them, silent, listening to their disapproval, the irony so thick I could barely breathe. And yet, all I felt was a quiet triumph, not the kind you shout, but the kind that simmers in your bones, knowing that you didn't just survive their dream, you outgrew it. And that was the moment I knew. Perhaps it was finally time for Aurora Knight to step into the light. But the decision to reveal myself wasn't sudden. It came like brushstrokes layered over years, each moment of suppression, every silenced truth adding color to the final composition. My father's casual dismissal of my painting in the hospital lobby that morning was simply the last stroke. What he didn't know was that another of my pieces was set to be unveiled that very evening at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Still in my white coat, the hallway around me sterile and humming, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Eli, my gallery owner, and 1 urgent message. Major problem with tonight's unveiling. Need to speak ASAP. I ducked into an empty consultation room, heart pounding. Eli, what's wrong? His voice buzzed through the line, tense. The Times is running a story on Aurora Knight. Someone at the hospital connected the dots. Noticed you're never on shift during major exhibits. Tied the anatomical precision of your work to medical training. They're running it tonight, just before the unveiling. My stomach dropped. 6 years of building walls between my two lives, Dr. Chin and Aurora Knight, were crumbling because of a few misaligned shifts. Can we stop it? I whispered. Not unless you want to confirm or deny on record. We have an hour. Through the consultation room window, I spotted my parents down the hall, making their rounds like they had for decades, unshaken, rooted in the version of success they had built and forced upon me. I told Eli I'd call him back. For years, I had fought to preserve this double life, desperately separating the obedient daughter from the rebellious creator. But it had become exhausting, like trying to keep oil and water apart by sheer force of will. Then my pager buzzed. Pediatric emergency. I ran, adrenaline drowning out the noise in my head. A child, mid-anaphylactic shock, trembling and terrified. I administered the shot, calmed his mother, and watched him clutch his stuffed elephant with relief. The mother touched my arm. Doctor, thank you. He was so scared, but you made him feel safe. I glanced at the whitewashed walls, sterile and silent, so different from the vibrant painting now hanging in the hospital's lobby, the one my father scoffed at. In that moment, clarity struck. I was good at this, not because I was molded by my parents, but because I had brought my whole self to the role, even the part they tried to erase. I stepped into the hallway, called Eli, and said, "Don't fight the story. In fact, I'll give them something better. Tell them Aurora Knight will be attending the unveiling in person, for the first time ever." Silence, then disbelief. Are you sure? This changes everything. Everything's already changing, I replied. Might as well do it on my terms. I hung up and, for the first time in my career, requested an emergency evening off. My supervisor, surprised, granted it without question. Then I did something even bolder. I called my parents. Mom, Dad, I need you to come to the Metropolitan Museum of Art tonight. There's something you need to see, I said, and when my mother asked, confused, the museum? I heard the hesitation in her voice as she added, Safia, we have dinner plans with the hospital board. Please, I interrupted, calm but firm, the weight of what was coming pressing into my ribs. It's important, more important than dinner. Whatever she heard in my voice must have cracked her resistance, because after a beat, my father said, What time? Back home, I opened the hidden closet that housed Aurora Knight. Unlike the utilitarian uniforms of Dr. Chin, these garments were a symphony of fabric and color, each one chosen not for practicality but for power. I reached for a silk dress I had hand-painted myself, a tapestry of brush strokes that whispered fragments of my truth. As I slipped it on, I thought of the painting being unveiled tonight, a piece unlike anything I had ever created. Daughter of Medicine was both confession and declaration. A woman in a white coat whose shadow painted at an easel, scalpels dissolving into paintbrushes, hospital corridors blooming into kaleidoscopic landscapes, the pulse of a golden EKG threading through it all. I painted it during brutal night shifts in the ICU, layering it between exhaustion and epiphanies, sometimes smearing it with tears I didn't have time to shed. And tonight, if the world didn't implode from my truth, it would sell for $3.5 million. My phone buzzed. Eli. The Times agreed to hold the piece until after the unveiling, But social media is already lit. You're trending. I stared at myself in the mirror. Artist's dress hugging my curves. Hospital ID still clipped to my bag like a relic from a past life. For the first time in years, I felt whole. "Let them talk," I said. By the time I arrived, the museum was buzzing, packed with critics, collectors, influencers, all whispering the same thing. Would Aurora Knight finally appear? My parents stood near the entrance, stiff in their boardroom best, their posture betraying unease. They hadn't seen me yet. Behind them, hidden beneath a velvet drape, waited the painting, my truth in full color. Eli appeared at my side, pale. "Press is everywhere. Last chance to disappear." "Not this time," I said, steady. The museum director stepped to the mic, voice echoing across the marble hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a historic evening. Tonight, after 6 years of speculation, the artist known as Aurora Knight." As the velvet slipped from the canvas, I stepped forward. My heart thundered, but my steps didn't falter. I reached my parents just as the first gasps broke the silence. "Mom, Dad," I said gently, watching their faces as they turned toward me. "There's something I need to tell you." Their eyes flicked over me. This version of their daughter they didn't recognize. Behind them, the painting now fully revealed, the crowd murmuring in awe. "I'm Aurora Knight." The words cut the air like a scalpel. Camera flashes erupted. My mother blanched. My father's jaw clenched. And in both their eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Raw, unfiltered shock. But before they could speak, before the reality could settle, the room erupted again. Not from scandal, but from something entirely unexpected. Something none of us could have predicted. And that moment would not just rewrite the narrative of my life. It would ripple across the art world like a detonation, changing everything. The silence stretched like a taut string, snapping only when the first camera flashed, unleashing chaos as reporters shouted questions, and the crowd surged forward, hungry to see the face behind the mystery of Aurora Knight. But all I could see were my parents, frozen. My mother's polished facade cracked first. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're a doctor." "I'm both," I said softly, steady despite the growing whirlwind around us. "I've always been both." Then, cutting through the commotion, Dr. James Morrison, head of the hospital board, appeared, flushed and breathless. "The painting in the lobby," he stammered. "The one unveiled this morning. That was you?" I nodded, and his next words reshaped the moment. "We'll have to cancel the purchase. We can't accept a $2 million donation from one of our own residents." Reporters exploded with renewed fervor. I could already hear the headlines. "Doctor by day, artist by night. Aurora Knight donates millions in secret." But it was my father's voice that sliced through it all. "Donation?" he asked sharply, turning to Dr. Morrison. "What donation?" Morrison blinked, puzzled. "The painting. It was purchased, and then the funds were returned to the hospital anonymously, for the pediatric program. We thought some anonymous philanthropist." The words faltered as realization settled in. My father turned to me slowly, his expression unreadable. "How many paintings?" he asked. "How much?" 38 major pieces," Eli answered, stepping forward like a proud curator presenting a priceless artifact. "Totaling just under 40 million. Aurora Knight is the highest-grossing contemporary artist under 40. My mother's knees seemed to falter. Nearby, an esteemed critic nearly squealed with delight. "The anatomical precision. It all makes sense now. She paints like a surgeon." "Actually," I said gently, "I bring an artist's heart to my medicine." And then, like fate had timed it perfectly, Doctor. Safia Chin, my chief resident, stepped forward, eyes glassy with emotion. "The Williams case," she said. "The impossible diagnosis last month. You told me you saw a pattern." I nodded. The boys' symptoms had baffled everyone, until I noticed something in their distribution that reminded me of complementary colors on a canvas, revealing what tests couldn't. "You see things differently," Dr. Chin said, voice catching. "It's why your diagnostic rate is so high. You don't just treat illness, you see it, like an artist." "Like an artist," my mother echoed, barely above a whisper. For the first time, her eyes softened, the shock yielding to a fragile shimmer of understanding. My father remained stoic, hands clasped behind his back, the pose of a man clinging to control as the earth shifted under him. The museum director was trying to regain the room's attention for the official unveiling of Daughter of Medicine, but the only unveiling that mattered had already happened. My father moved toward the painting. This tribute, this confession, this war cry disguised as art. He stood before it, eyes scanning the canvas like he was studying an X-ray. The crowd faded. The cameras fell silent in my mind. I held my breath. Then he spoke, voice low and rough. The anatomy. Every detail. Every proportion. It's perfect. I stepped beside him. The daughter he once tried to mold into a legacy of scalpels and sterile success. "Yes," I said, eyes locked on the painting we both understood now in ways words never could. "Because I learned it from you." He turned to me with tears shimmering in his eyes, tears I'd never seen on my father's face before, and said in a voice stripped of pride and certainty, "All these years, we thought we were teaching you to be a doctor, but you were becoming something more." My mother reached for my hand then, her composure unraveling as she murmured, "The painting in the hospital. You didn't just donate the money. You chose that spot in the lobby. Because it's where you both stop every morning," I finished gently. "I wanted to bring beauty into your routine, even if you didn't know it was from me." The crowd still surged, cameras flashed, reporters barked out questions, but none of it reached us. It was just the three of us, finally seeing each other without the fog of expectation. Eli approached, hesitant. "Rhea, the buyers are waiting. Bidding on Daughter of Medicine has already exceeded the asking price. They want to know if you'll still sell." Before I could answer, my father stepped forward. "No," he said, his voice clear and commanding. "This painting belongs in the hospital, next to the other one, where everyone can see what happens when you don't force someone to choose between two halves of themselves." I opened my mouth to protest. "Dad, it's worth millions." But he smiled, and it was a smile I'd never seen before, a mix of pride, wonder, and aching regret. "So is my daughter." The story exploded overnight. The headlines read like fiction. Doctor by day, millionaire artist by night. But the truth was even stranger. The art world dissected how medical precision shaped my brushwork. The medical community marveled at how artistic perception enhanced diagnostic skill. The hospital, once a fortress of sterility, launched a groundbreaking program blending art with care, and named me its director. My work now hangs in elite galleries and children's wards alike, straddling two worlds I once believed I had to keep apart. My parents? They're still learning. Sometimes I catch them looking at me like I'm a stranger, but more often, I find them gazing at my work with something new in their eyes. Not analysis or critique, but reverence. Last week, I saw my father lingering in front of the lobby painting, hands behind his back, silent in his white coat. "I was wrong," he said quietly, not turning around. "When I told you art wasn't a real future, I thought I was protecting you from struggle. but I nearly stopped you from becoming who you truly are." I stepped beside him. "You didn't stop me," I said. "You taught me precision, discipline, how to understand people beyond their symptoms. I just painted those lessons onto a different kind of canvas." He laughed then. Really laughed. "Your mother's talking about taking an art class," he said. "She wants to understand your world better." I smiled. It was always the same world. I just needed everyone else to see it. And now, when people ask if I'm a doctor or an artist, I say what I've always known deep down. I'm someone who refuses to be defined by anyone else's limitations. I heal in two ways. One with paint, one with medicine. Both come from the same desire: to leave things better than I found them, to make people whole. My parents finally understand that success doesn't always wear a white coat. Sometimes it's covered in color. The plaque beneath the hospital lobby painting now bears both my names: Dr. Safia Chin and Aurora Knight. A quiet reminder that no one is just one thing, and that the bravest thing we can do is reveal our full spectrum. In my studio, no longer hidden, a blank canvas waits, not for a secret, but for a signature. Because this isn't the end. It's just the first time I'm signing my story with my real name.